New York City, the city of ambition, skyscrapers, and endless noise. But on July 28, 2025, that noise was replaced by something far more terrifying. It started at 12:38 p.m. Midtown Manhattan was in full motion, office workers spilling out for lunch, tourists snapping selfies near Bryant Park, and street vendors calling out their daily specials. Nothing unusual. Then, without warning, a single gunshot cracked through the summer air. Witnesses say it was so sharp and unexpected, most people froze, unsure of what they had just heard. But then came another shot. And another. In seconds, chaos erupted. Pedestrians screamed and scattered. Car horns blared as drivers slammed their brakes. People ducked behind parked cars, hid inside delis, or ran blindly into the streets. The city that never sleeps suddenly felt like a war zone. By the time the gunfire stopped, for innocent people were dead. Their lives, their stories, their futures, erased in less than 10 minutes. And the man responsible? He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was found sitting on the cold pavement, his back against a wall, his gun at his side, dead from a single self-inflicted shot. And next to him, a backpack. Inside it, boxes of ammunition and a notebook that read like a manifesto. Scribbled across nearly every page was one haunting line. "They'll remember my name." Who was this man? Why did he do it? And how did the warning signs go unseen for so long? This wasn't just another headline. This was a tragedy years in the making. A story of anger, obsession, and a city left shaken to its core. And it all began long before that first gunshot. Before the chaos, before the sound of gunfire turned New York into a nightmare, there was just a man, sitting alone. Henry Sloan, 61 years old, was the kind of person you'd walk past without noticing. Neighbors called him quiet. Former coworkers said he was serious but reliable. Nothing about him screamed danger. In fact, he blended into the city, another face in the crowd, another man with a past no one cared to ask about. But Henry's life wasn't ordinary. It was a slow, silent collapse. Years earlier, Henry had been a security guard, stationed in the heart of Manhattan. He wore his uniform with pride. He liked routine. He liked order. But that sense of stability didn't last. A workplace dispute, one that escalated further than anyone expected, ended his career. He was terminated. No pension. No farewell. Just gone. Friends faded. His social circle evaporated. He became the man in apartment 4B who barely left his home except for groceries. He spent hours in front of a glowing computer screen, scrolling through news articles, conspiracy forums, and online comment sections where his bitterness found an echo chamber. According to his landlord, he rarely spoke, except to complain about how the world was out to get him. To Henry, every failure was someone else's fault. Every closed door felt personal. And yet, outwardly, no one thought he was dangerous. He wasn't violent. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of person who made the evening news. But beneath the silence, Henry was stewing. For Henry, there wasn't one single breaking point. It was a series of small humiliations stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall. Investigators later pieced together the timeline. 6 months before the shooting, Henry was evicted from a private security association where he once held a volunteer position. He felt humiliated. 3 months later, he posted his first cryptic message online. "They'll regret this. All of them will." No one reported it. No one even noticed. 2 months before the shooting, Henry made several uncharacteristic visits to Midtown Manhattan. Surveillance cameras captured him walking past office buildings, sitting on benches, and observing crowds. It looked like harmless loitering. In hindsight, it was rehearsal. The week before the attack, he purchased a handgun legally. He bought extra ammunition. And he wrote page after page in his notebook, dark ramblings about being invisible, about wanting the city to see him one last time. To Henry, this wasn't random. This was revenge. Not against one person, but against a world that he believed had chewed him up and spit him out. July 28, 12:38 p.m. Midtown Manhattan. The day was bright, almost painfully normal. Office workers left their buildings, laughing over coffee runs. Tourists lingered near Times Square. No one noticed Henry Sloan, wearing a black hoodie and carrying a worn-out backpack. He walked down 7th Avenue like any other pedestrian. And then, without a single word, he raised his gun. The first shot rang out. A delivery driver collapsed instantly. People froze, staring at Henry in disbelief. Then came the second shot. Panic exploded. Screams filled the air. Car tires screeched. Some dove for cover. Others sprinted blindly into traffic. Henry fired again. A young woman, barely 26, was struck while eating lunch outside. A father of 3, visiting from New Jersey, was next. His wife later told police she thought it was fireworks until she saw him fall. Henry kept moving. Not running. Not yelling. His face was blank, mechanical. Every bullet was methodical. 4 people were killed. 2 more were injured. And then, silence. Henry sat down on a concrete ledge. Witnesses say he stared at the street, as if he was watching a movie only he could understand. And then, without hesitation, he turned the gun on himself. When police arrived, he was slumped against the wall, dead. His backpack lay beside him. Inside, ammunition, a single water bottle, and his notebook, his manifesto. Written in jagged handwriting across the first page were 5 words that would haunt investigators. "This is how I win." By the time the first patrol units arrived, Midtown Manhattan had transformed into a frozen snapshot of chaos. Yellow police tape cut across the busy streets. Squad cars lined the sidewalks, sirens wailing in an endless loop. Officers moved with urgency, weapons drawn, scanning every corner for a second shooter. But there wasn't one. Henry Sloan was sitting exactly where he ended his life, his lifeless body propped against a wall, his gun still resting loosely in his hand. The smell of gunpowder hung in the summer air, mingling with exhaust fumes and the faint scent of street food from vendors who had long since abandoned their carts. The ground was littered with evidence. Shell casings glinted like cruel souvenirs of what had just happened. A spilled cup of coffee, now streaked with blood, marked where one of the victims fell. Phones lay scattered, dropped mid-call or during desperate attempts to flee. Witnesses huddled near the police perimeter, some crying, some eerily silent. One woman, still trembling, told officers she saw his eyes. "He wasn't angry," she said, her voice breaking. "He was empty. Like nothing mattered anymore." Inside Henry's backpack, detectives found more than ammunition. There were torn photographs of his old security uniform, pay stubs from nearly a decade ago, and the notebook. Every page was worse than the last. Disorganized rants about betrayal, being forgotten, and a disturbing number of references to making them see me. But there was something else. Scribbled between the ramblings was a single list of names. None of them matched the victims. To this day, investigators don't know if they were intended targets or just ghosts from Henry's past. By 2 p.m., the scene was swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed. Helicopters circled overhead. But beneath all the noise, one truth was undeniable. This wasn't random madness. This was planned. Calculated. And the worst part? No one saw it coming. New York City is no stranger to violence, but this was different. Within minutes, the NYPD deployed specialized units. SWAT officers swept the area to ensure no secondary threat existed. EMTs rushed in with stretchers, stepping over shattered glass and dropped handbags to reach the wounded. One paramedic, a 12-year veteran, later admitted in an interview, "You train for mass casualties. You think you're ready, but then you look at a young woman with a bullet wound in her chest, and you see her phone ringing, and it's mom calling. That's when it hits you. You're not ready for this. You never are." Mayor Eric Jennings appeared at the scene less than 2 hours later. His words were solemn but fierce. "New York will not bow to fear. We will find every answer. We will hold this city together." But as his statement aired live on television, social media erupted. Hashtags like #Midtown shooting and #Henry Sloan began trending. Videos of the chaos, shaky footage from bystanders, were shared millions of times within hours. News outlets ran the same haunting image: Henry's body slumped against the wall, his face partially shadowed, police standing guard around him like sentries in a crime scene frozen in time. That night, the city felt different. Streets that normally pulsed with life grew eerily quiet. Police presence doubled across Manhattan. And for every New Yorker who passed the barricaded market, the same question lingered. Why did this happen here? The days after the shooting were filled with grief and outrage. Memorials began popping up near the crime scene. Bouquets of flowers, handwritten notes, and candles lined the sidewalk where the victims fell. Strangers hugged one another. Some prayed. Some simply stood in silence, staring at the spot where ordinary life had been shattered. The victims' stories began to emerge. Michael Torres, 34, a delivery driver saving up to buy a house for his family. Jenna Lee, 26, a graphic designer who had only been in New York for 6 months. Robert Gaines, 42, a father of 3 who had been out on his lunch break. Patricia Lane, 57, a retired teacher who volunteered at a local shelter. These weren't just names. They were lives. And New York City demanded answers. Meanwhile, Henry Sloan became a household name, not as a man, but as a warning. Talk shows debated gun laws. Online forums dissected his every move. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Was this political? Was there a hidden manifesto? Or was this just another case of an overlooked man exploding in the worst way possible? For the families of the victims, none of that mattered. They didn't want theories. They wanted accountability. And that's when the investigation began, and it uncovered a story darker than anyone expected. Detectives knew from the start this wasn't random. The NYPD's Homicide Division, joined by federal agents, launched a full-scale investigation within hours of the shooting. They began with Henry Sloan's apartment, a small, dimly lit unit on the 5th floor of a rent-controlled building in Queens. What they found inside painted a chilling portrait of a man spiraling into darkness. The walls were bare except for one, covered in newspaper clippings about layoffs, workplace disputes, and violent crimes. His laptop history revealed hours of browsing gun forums, survivalist websites, and disturbing manifestos from past shooters. Investigators also discovered a hidden folder titled simply, "Last Day." Inside were detailed notes, maps of Midtown Manhattan, rough sketches of street corners, timelines marked down to the minute. He had planned this for weeks, maybe months. Detective Laura Hensley, one of the lead investigators, later told reporters, "He didn't snap. He didn't lose control. He prepared." That's what's terrifying about Henry Sloan. He was calm, methodical. He believed he was doing something meaningful. Witness interviews only deepen the mystery. Henry wasn't known to be violent. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. Former coworkers said he never raised his voice. Yet, there was one thread investigators couldn't ignore. In 2019, Henry had been fired from a security job in Midtown, only a few blocks from where he opened fire. And then came the surveillance footage. Video from the morning of the shooting showed Henry sitting on a bench across from the market for nearly an hour. He didn't move. He didn't fidget. And then at 12:38 p.m., he stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked toward his victims. For the NYPD, this wasn't just a crime scene. This was a timeline of rage, mapped out step by step. But one question remained unanswered. Why now? To understand Henry Sloan, investigators turned to experts in criminal psychology. Dr. Evelyn Marks, a forensic psychologist brought in to profile the shooter, described Henry as a classic grievance collector. In her words, he wasn't insane. He wasn't delusional. He was angry, and he held on to that anger until it became the only thing that defined him. Henry's writings supported this theory. His notebook wasn't filled with random madness. It was organized. Each page was a list of perceived wrongs, co-workers who mocked him, managers who destroyed his life, even entire institutions he claimed had turned their backs on him. In the margins, Henry often repeated one phrase, "Invisible until I make them see." Experts say this mindset is chillingly common among mass shooters. A toxic blend of isolation, bitterness, and a desperate need for recognition. Henry wasn't looking for money. He wasn't even seeking revenge against specific people. He wanted the world to feel his existence, even if it was through fear. When a person's identity is built entirely on resentment, Dr. Marks explained, they start believing violence is the only way to be remembered. And Henry made sure he would be remembered. As the investigation continued, theories emerged. Some experts believe Henry's attack was triggered by a specific event, a final straw that pushed him from obsession to action. Police uncovered a letter from his former employer rejecting an appeal to reinstate his security license. It was dated just 3 weeks before the shooting. Others argue it wasn't one event but a slow-burning collapse. Dr. Marks described it as death by 1,000 cuts. Each perceived insult, every rejection, every lonely night in that apartment built up like pressure in a sealed container, until it exploded. Then came the debate over whether this could have been stopped. Law enforcement analysts pointed to missed red flags: his online posts, his purchase of a firearm, his sudden visits to Midtown. None of them, individually, were enough to warrant intervention. But together, they painted a picture of a man preparing for something horrific. We don't have a system that catches people like Henry Sloan, former FBI profiler Marcus Reed stated on a national news broadcast. We only recognize them after the damage is done. But one theory stood out. Some believe Henry chose Midtown because it was a stage, the biggest stage he could find. Crowds, cameras, chaos. If his goal was to be seen, there was no better place. And in the cruelest way imaginable, he got exactly what he wanted. In the weeks that followed, New York City slowly returned to its rhythm, but the scar remained. The market reopened, though the sight of fresh flowers outside its entrance became a daily reminder of the lives lost. Henry Sloan was cremated in a city morgue with no family present. No service. No mourners. Just another unclaimed body in a city of millions. But for the victims and their families, there was no closure. Only questions: how did no one see this coming? How many other Henrys are out there, quietly waiting for the moment they decide to be seen? New Yorkers are known for their resilience, but this shooting wasn't something the city could simply shrug off. It sparked debates about gun laws, mental health, and how society handles those who fall through the cracks. Detective Hensley summed it up best. We want a villain we can point at and say, that's why this happened. But sometimes there's no single answer. Sometimes evil is just ordinary. And that's what makes it so terrifying. One thing is clear: this wasn't a random outburst. It was a message. And if Henry Sloan really meant what he wrote in his final notebook, "They'll remember my name," then the most disturbing question of all might not be why he did it, but whether someone out there plans to finish what he started.